Yes. Agree.
So, and then that's kind of where that is. Now let's move on to this other one. People saying that Ben Minich's offer has to do with Peyton Bowen. It's not even remotely close to being accurate. This is what we've been told all along. Ben Minich visited Notre Dame or camped at Notre Dame this summer and looked really good. Mm-hmm. At the time, Notre Dame was wanting a third safety. Now, I think we could debate whether a third safety is a need. After some things I've learned recently, I understand why a third safety is a need, not a want, because we had said earlier, Ryan, it was more of a want than a need.
Yeah.
I think now it's going to be more of a need, just because of how the roster is going to shake out with certain players. Mm-hmm. This is about Caleb Downs, not Peyton Bowen. If they offer another safety along with Ben Minich, then you get worried about Peyton Bowen, or it being because of Peyton Bowen. This has nothing to do with Peyton Bowen. This has to do with they gave their best shot to Caleb Downs. It's very obvious now that they're not getting him. He's going to go to either Alabama, Georgia, or Ohio State. That's just the reality of it.
Yep.
So this is a move that has to do with that. And that's why it's coming when it is. And so I'm just telling you what our sources in every single aspect of this have told us. This was about Caleb Downs. This is something we've been told weeks ago could happen. It actually happened a little bit earlier than I thought. I thought they were going to offer him when he visited, because we anticipate him visiting soon. But they decided to offer him beforehand.
Sure.
So it's an interesting move. We're going to talk about Ben a little bit as a player, but obviously people are going to start drawing parallels that are just inaccurate. And, you can take it for however you want to take it. But the reality is this has nothing to do with Peyton Bowen. This has everything to do with Caleb Downs, because as we saw, Notre Dame look, you're going to miss kids sometimes, right? Mm-hmm. As I sit back and I say, I think there are some things that we could get into, and maybe we'll have this discussion on the premium board at some point in time. Like, I think maybe there are things you could have maybe done differently with Jason Moore. I do. And we'll dive into that.
Sure.
With Caleb Downs, I don't know what else Notre Dame could have done. Sometimes you're just going to put everything you have and you do a great job and the kid loves you. He just likes other people more. And I think that's kind of what happened with Caleb Downs. So this is where Ben Minich's offer is coming from, Ryan. It's about Caleb Downs, not Peyton Bowen.
Yeah, and I understand why some people look at it, Brian, and they do make that parallel to Peyton Bowen, because that's the talking point, right? Recently, it's like, oh, is Peyton, again, for the 20th time this offseason, is Peyton Bowen locked in? Is he looking at other schools? Yada, yada, yada. The conversation gets brought up, and then pretty shortly after, this morning, Ben Minich gets offered. So you're kind of like, oh, that must be a direct correlation to Peyton Bowen. But I love that you kind of painted this picture. It's not about Peyton Bowen. It's simply they're not going to get Caleb Downs. And it stinks. I mean, again, he's a 5-star, top 10 caliber player in the country, in my opinion, Caleb Downs, and in a couple other recruiting services opinions as well. He's a fantastic player. You gave your best shot. Nothing to feel bad for if you're Notre Dame. I mean, literally, it was always going to be an uphill battle, and they battled until the end. Let's give them credit for that, man. It was always going to be tough getting Caleb Downs out of the Southeast. I don't think he's going to go to Ohio State personally. I think he's going to end up at Alabama or Georgia. We'll see what the final verdict is. But this one is Notre Dame wants a third safety. They're not going to get Caleb Downs, and they have identified Ben Minich as that third safety. And this is something also with the timing thing. Like you said, Brian, we heard about this weeks ago, that they were doing the evaluation of him. They were taking a look at him. And when he checked those boxes, sort of like Joe Otting, right? Like the sizing him up and just trying to check those boxes. The minute he did that, they liked him, right? So, I mean, not that they liked him. They kind of just checked that final box for him,
right?
If that makes sense.
And you got to understand, too, he was not a kid that was really on Notre Dame's radar as an offerable player until he came to camp in June. That's the other aspect of it, is he earned the opportunity to get an offer depending on how things shook out. So that's the other thing you have to consider is if he doesn't camp at Notre Dame this summer, and it wasn't an Irish Invasion, it was a different camp, and test and work out and do the things in front of the staff the way he did, he doesn't have an offer right now. They'd be going in a different direction. Now, we'll dive into the film. I got to see his senior film. I view him right now, if I'm just being honest, as a good football player, but more of a Purdue, Indiana, Cincinnati type of football player. Now, again, Cincinnati just beat Notre Dame, but it's not that it's a different situation, but I view him as a good football player that is a Big Ten caliber guy, but a Purdue, Indiana, Minnesota, Illinois type of Big Ten player.
Mhm.
Now, what I was told is that's kind of was Notre Dame's opinion as well, which is why they didn't offer and why he had to come to camp to earn it. He tested extremely well, performed very well at the camp, and that's why Notre Dame likes him. I didn't see that, so I can't change my opinion based on camp. Number one, I'm that's just not how I operate unless I see every single drill a kid had. So I've got to see the senior film, and we'll be open to it. Just like I was when Adon Schuler committed after his sophomore year. I said, he's a good player, but I got questions about the athleticism and all that, but I'll be open-minded about it because he does have some other traits I like.
Sure.
I saw instincts, I saw hitting, and I see a lot of that in Ben Minich. I see a kid that's instinctive, makes a lot of plays, but I don't see a Notre Dame caliber athlete on film. And that's how I felt about Adon Schuler after a sophomore year when he committed to Notre Dame. But we were told then, he had a great camp. He tested better. And so I said, okay, I'll be open-minded to see what he does in the fall. And then you went and saw that athleticism jump on the football field. And so now our opinion of Adon Schuler is much higher.
Yes.
So you always have to be open to it. But, we're also not the type that all of a sudden, just because Notre Dame offered, we think he's a better player. You know what I mean? Like, I got to see the film. That's the reality of it. We got to see the film and see how he projects and how he progresses and all those type of things. But Notre Dame likes him, and that's why it was. And there was a comment from Brandon that I want to address too. Brandon says, why didn't the staff pursue King Mac? Now, that's a question that I've raised to Ryan publicly. I'd try to go flip King Mac. I love King Mac. The concern that Notre Dame has always had about King Mac is size. So he's like 5'9", 5'10", and that's the concern. Now, I don't care. He's a playmaker and a burner, and I would always want to get into St. Thomas Aquinas down in Florida. That's just my opinion.
Penn State got a really good one with
yes,
King Mac. No doubt about it.
Big pickup. Now, I would have tried to flip him, but the staff isn't as high on King Mac as I am. The other thing, too, Brandon, to your question, because it's a very fair question, especially with how high I am on a guy like King Mac, the timing is also different. And this is what I want to make clear from what I said at the beginning, just because I've said it and kind of moved on from it. Mm-hmm. When sort of the spring started from a recruiting standpoint, a third safety wasn't necessarily a need. Then they went through spring ball. The roster shakes out certain ways. Some guys that maybe they thought were going to be at safety didn't perform as well. Maybe some guys, and I'm kind of thinking of the freshman class here with Jaden Bellamy, that they thought could play safety, maybe projects more as a slot outside corner type of player. Yeah. And that's saying that for a reason, right? And so I think the situation has changed as well. Also, there are certain players on the board they wanted at positions that they had already met their need that they didn't get. Biggest thing is the lines. They wanted 4 linemen and 5 linemen, 4 on defense and 5 on offense. But there were 2 players they would have taken to get past that. Monroe Freeling, they're out with now. So they're not going to take a 6th offensive lineman. And now that Jason Moore's off the board, they're not going to take a 5th defensive lineman. So now that has opened up another safety spot even more, to where with Caleb Downs, it was, we're going to take Caleb Downs because he's too good not to take.
Sure.
And you could have made it work. Now it's the third safety becomes a need, and there's additional room. Because remember, when the spring started, we were talking about leading for Jason Moore at the time, leading for Dante Moore at the time, leading for other players. You started looking and saying, like, boy, they're going to get up to 27. And, you look at it and say, you got to be careful about the new offers you're putting out. Well, now it's looking more like 25. So there's now room. And now you can feel better about taking a kid like Ben Minich, who projects as a safety, but at the very least is going to be a really good special teams player for you. And bring some two-way value. We talk a lot about two-way value. He actually, some of his film at receiver looks even better to me than his film on defense at times. And I think part of the thing too, I got to try to watch him this fall, because part of the thing too is when you watch him, he's always playing next to Malik Hartford. And that hurts because like you're looking at like that's the dude that Notre Dame, that's the kind of guy Notre Dame should be going after, Malik Hartford, who's committed to Ohio State. And then you watch Ben Minich, like, yeah, he's a good football player, but he's not that guy, right? And that's something I think hurts my evaluation of Ben Minich as well. So I'm going to keep an open mind about him. And again, he's a good football player. He's a Purdue, Indiana type of guy based on film I see right now. He's also a really smart kid. He has offers from Princeton, Harvard, and Yale. So that fits as well. But it's the Notre Dame's evaluation is again based on stuff that we haven't seen. And so I'm trying to be honest about what we think about him and not change that view because Notre Dame has now offered him, but also to say, but I want to be, Ryan is going to be, and we want all of you to be open-minded to see if what we're being told about him and his jump and athleticism then shows up on film. He was reported as having run a 10.47 in the 100. That was wind aided. His times are consistently in the 10.7s and 10.8s, which is good, but that's more like, mid to high 4.5-ish type of good. Maybe a low 4.5 type of good. It's not like 4.4 type of goods, but his other athletic numbers check out well. Those are all good things. I'm going to be open-minded about it, but just right now, he's a guy that I look at and say, that's a depth player for now, right? Assuming Notre Dame, I mean, we don't even know if definitely Notre Dame's going to get him. He's got to visit and all that kind of stuff, and we'll kind of see how it goes. But that's kind of where we are at this point in time. And so somebody said, look, folks, we got to chill out a little bit. This is not a desperation offer. Notre Dame is far from being in that situation. Sometimes it's okay for us to say they like him more than I do.
Sure.
Without it being a desperation thing or,
how I don't understand how it's a desperation thing when you have Peyton Bowen and Adon Schuler already in the class. Right. I don't get how that's a desperation.
Well, I think that's probably coming from, and I'm speaking for someone, this may not be their reasoning, but I think part of it is because people who still think Peyton Bowen is going to leave the class are going to never view this as anything other than a fear about Peyton Bowen, which I understand. I actually understand that.
Sure.
I do.
Sure. Yeah,
I do.
I get that.
I do.
I would say this about Ben Minich is the reason that I am kind of keeping my eye open to it is I have not seen the kid in person. And this would be one of the kids, Brian, for me, of the offers on the board that I would most like to see in person, because I have a feeling that he might be a player that is a lot more impressive athletically in person than he is on film. Mm-hmm. And because we mentioned it, Notre Dame needed to see him in person, right? Mm-hmm. Like that was like
his film didn't blow them away either. Right.
100%. It was the fact of eyeing him up, see him in person, seeing the athleticism work in front of your eyes. Right. There are some players that do not pop on film. It doesn't mean they're not a good football player. Right. It means that there's some part of your game that you appreciate more in person than you do on film. Right. So, yeah.
So we'll find out, right? And we'll definitely see how this all pans out. So, his film is definitely going to be some of the first I watch early in the fall. We'll put it that way. There's no question about it. But I do want to emphasize, look, we are confident with where Notre Dame is right now in Peyton Bowen. That could change if he continues to take more visits, but as of right now, that's where he's at. We like Ben Minich as a player. I think he's a good Big Ten caliber player, but not necessarily a Notre Dame, Ohio State caliber guy. Notre Dame, he really earned an offer this summer, which means I got to see what his fall film is. Now, he checked in about 6 foot tall, over 180 pounds. Testing numbers were good this summer, and then he, of course, blew it away in drills. So we will see kind of how it plays out. But